Hello, Internet. I'm here in Virginia Beach this morning talking about Docker, Swarm, DevOps, orchestration, Kubernetes, the Internet in general, open source, all things Hacktoberfest, which is going to be a big topic this morning. And I'm glad you're visiting and checking out this video. If you're first time here with my AMA lives on YouTube, just a quick couple of notes and some logistical stuff. So this lasts a little bit over an hour. I am actually working this week on making these previous all posted and put on a YouTube. Oops. It's delayed, honey. Oh. It's delayed. So the cool thing is I have my wife watching to make sure that my audio and everything's correct, and she was noticing that I was not online because this is normally delayed. So in case you didn't know on YouTube, it's like, I don't know, 5, 10 second, 30-second delay on things. It just depends on my settings. So she was a little confused. She's like, all I see is a blue screen. Anyway, all right. So back to the regularly scheduled program. Today I want to talk at first about what we're going to do and how this is going to work, and then we're going to talk some news, like open source news, especially about Hacktoberfest. That's my big thing this week. And then we're going to get to the questions, and I'll just ramp through them as fast as I can. If I don't answer your question completely, then ask again in a more detailed way or follow up with that question. I almost always get through all the questions in the hour, maybe hour and 15 minutes. And if you have to check out, no worries. I'm going to be posting these live later. So a friend of mine has convinced me that I should be putting these all in a playlist on YouTube, even though they're random live things that sometimes don't always go well, like mics not working and video problems and internet streaming issues. And sometimes it's not perfect, but I'm glad you're here and we're going to have some fun. So if ask your questions about really anything, but I won't know the answers to everything. I am into DevOps. That's what I do for a living. I train on workshops. I teach people in live workshops. I speak at conferences, and I do workshops at live conferences, and then I do courses on Udemy. So if you haven't checked them out, I will talk about the links later. But most of the things we're going to talk about today, there are either references or links or coupons to things, all on my website at brettfisher.com/Docker to get all the things. So that'll be the first link is, in fact, yeah, not sure if that's actually a link. If it works that way in YouTube, PS, brettfisher.com, Docker. Let me try that again. Maybe it likes it. Anyway, my chat doesn't show. Oh, there it goes as the link. So I try to put all of my resources there and that are related to Docker and my courses and all my open source repos and the tools I recommend and yada, 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 right? So I keep updating that on the fly. Of course, it's not everything, and I'm sure you'll have questions that are related about other stuff. So this week, well, really, the 1st of October, DigitalOcean and Twilio and GitHub all launched Hacktoberfest this year. This is the 5th year of Hacktoberfest, and it's a fun time to basically give back to open source. And so I always use this as an opportunity to think of those things that I maybe haven't done, that I keep thinking I'm going to improve on someone else's repo or even my own repos. Maybe it's just documentation. It's not even code. And we'll talk all about the different things you can do on that and ways you can give back without really being an open source contributor coder in that repo. There's lots of ways to give back. In this case, for this contest, you have to get 5 PRs. 5 PRs in the month. So you have to do 5 pull requests on any open source repo on GitHub. Ideally, you're doing this legitimately. You're not just making a fake repo and making fake pull requests. I mean, you can obviously get the t-shirt that way, but that's not the, we all have t-shirts. Like this is not, you're not getting gold for this. You're just getting a t-shirt. But it's cool to sort of collect them. Sadly, in years past, I haven't always been able to do it. So friends of mine, I'm sure they have every year's t-shirt and they're different every year. So it's sort of a thing to say, hey, look, this is how I'm giving back to open source. And so the 4 or 5 PRs rather that you do, they can be code. They can be legitimate code. And a lot of my tools, I need documentation. I need better examples in YAML for things in Swarm and in Docker. And there's lots of stuff you can do with Docker, especially on the Docker documentation website. And so we'll show some examples of that in a minute, but docs.docker.com is where all the documentation's at. And every single one of those pages you can click on and edit directly on GitHub. In fact, those of you that are Microsoft fans and using Windows, on Windows, you're probably spending more time on Microsoft's documentation, and I've noticed recently that they're starting to do that as well. On their documentation, you can edit it right there, and I'm not sure if it goes to GitHub, but if it does, there you go. You can improve documentation. You can change a spelling error. I'm sure I have tons of them, and that will help you get pull requests to meet your 5 for the month. And at the end of the day, it's just about legitimate. Getting involved in the community in a legitimate way, whether it's small or large. You don't have to do this gigantic feature to do that, right? So let's switch over to the browser, and let me show you a few things. So, is it not okay?
Kathy said it's slow, and someone else in there said volume up.
Oh, volume up. My volume is showing yellow. I can turn it up a little bit, but otherwise I'll be redlining. So thanks for the note on the volume. Volume is a constant struggle in here because I get excited and I talk loud. So before we go to the questions, let me just show you a couple of things on how to do this for Hacktoberfest. So if you go to my website, brettfisher.com, my top post there that I put there today is going to be about Hacktoberfest, and basically it's my wish list. It's my projects. It's some quick explanation, as well as just how much I like DigitalOcean. They're a great company, and I get to work closer and closer with them thanks to you. I talk about them in my course. I use them as an example for setting up a quick test swarm for you to demo and play with. And I actually got to visit their offices in New York City when I was there a couple of weeks ago at O'Reilly's Velocity Conference giving a swarm workshop. So they let me sort of hang out in their yoga room and have a little namaste, as well as watching the great skyline over Manhattan. So that was a lot of fun. And in here, I list some of my major repos that need help, including some simple tools that I use as examples in the courses, and that they could use other things like Kubernetes, because that's a new focus of mine, and also a new course that's going to be announced here pretty soon. We're going to be working on that through the end of the year, so expect an announcement sometime around the end of the year about that course. There's some stuff in here related to Node.js, which is another course that I'm working on that will be launched first. That one's actually going to be launched this fall. So the ways to keep up on all this stuff is to go to brettfisher.com/newsletter and sign up for that. And I don't send it very often, so don't be surprised if you don't see something for a month. But basically, I do it when I feel like there's a bunch of stuff worth talking about. And there's obviously lots of other DevOps newsletters and stuff like that. I wanted mine to be sort of more focused on Docker and the tooling around that. There's a Kubernetes newsletter if you just search on that. Node.js has one. There's a DevOps one from one of the CNCF members. That's a great one. And you basically can Google all those topics. And I didn't want to just do those again. So mine tends to be more focused specifically on what people are learning in my courses, as well as the projects that I'm working on and excited about. So hopefully you find that newsletter fun every, month or so when I send one of those out. So I will be announcing on those, of course, any new courses, any new major YouTube videos that come out. I announce on that newsletter, as well as on the Slack channel if you are in Slack for Docker Mastery. So if you've taken one of my courses, you get access to a Slack channel with over 11,000 people in there. It's just amazing, the community around containers. And so we talk in there every day. If you're a student in there, you know that I'm on there almost every day talking to people about how to do the things they're trying to do in containers and DevOps. So anyway, I have projects here. One of my new exciting ones is the dog versus cat repo, which is a full swarm build out. And I'm trying to make that even more feature rich this fall before DockerCon EU, which I'll be doing another talk on it at DockerCon EU, showing more things, how to do them in Swarm. And then obviously the Node and PHP projects, Node.js PHP projects for default templates of projects. Those are really popular. Everybody really likes those. The PHP one is kind of crap right now, so It needs a lot of love. So for those of you that are PHP programmers, and especially Laravel, obviously they have their own great repos and their own opinions on how to do things. But I thought it would, I'm using real projects and real working examples to make sort of a simpler version. If you've done anything with Laravel doc, you know that that's a pretty complex solution with a really huge file, really huge compose file. And I'm not trying to go to that level of complexity. I'm really trying to give more explanation than automation, because I think the automation obscures a lot of the things that go on in Docker, and I don't want to hide the complexity from people. I want them to understand it, and that I feel like that's better to do through explanations of things than just completely scripting the crap out of something so that you never know what's going on in the background. Anyway, so other projects that I think are really great in here that I don't run, but I also support, I just give a couple in here. There's a great thing called the Awesome Docker List. So if you have a tool that you're using related to containers, it should go on that Awesome Docker List. You should check that out. It is Docker focused. It is not everything in the container community, but it is things that work on Docker specifically. Docker Swarm Visualizer. If you've taken my courses, you know about that. That's a Docker provided open source tool, and they're always taking contributions. NetShoot is a fantastic network troubleshooting tool. So even if you don't do everything in containers and you're just doing distributed computing, and I think we're all pretty much doing distributed computing at this point. If you have more than a few servers and they're all talking amongst each other, it's basically distributed computing at this point, especially in the cloud. So that's a great toolkit. It's actually a container image that from one of the Docker engineers that basically combines a whole bunch of Linux tools into one container. So you can download that image and run it anywhere and have access to every tool without having to worry about, oh, does this, the Ubuntu image, how do I install this tool? You just have them all there in sort of an accessible from anywhere kind of toolkit. It's pretty neat. And then, of course, the Docker documentation. If you just go to the Docker documentation, you click on any page in there, and you can see on the right, it'll say, edit this page. And that will tell you, that'll take you straight to the GitHub. In fact, I'll just click it, because it'll take me straight to an edit screen that will make a PR to Docker in open source to change anything on that page. I will say that with Docker's documentation, they are quality focused, so don't be surprised if they're even nitpicky about things like commas and punctuation and spelling, obviously, and stuff like that. Because I suck at it, I do get a lot of feedback from that team that, oh, you missed a comma here, or you could rephrase this sentence to be a little clearer, stuff like that. But regardless, you've made PRs. They don't have to be accepted. They just have to be legitimate, because obviously if they're spam and someone deletes them, then they don't count. So you just need 5 of those by the end of the month. So I hope you get your t-shirts. I hope you sign up for the contest. You can just sign up either through my blog or go to Hacktoberfest. Just Google that, and that'll get you to the sign-up page. And I hope you contribute to open source. All right. So now that's enough of the talking about the week and what's going on. Let's focus on your questions. Let's get a lot of the questions. We had some early birds in before the bell rung at 11 o'clock my time, so they get up first, and then we just scroll through the list and see how many we can answer. Good morning. Let's see. So I may not say your name correctly. I apologize if I mispronounce it. Let's see who's up first. Thanks for letting me know about the audio. I appreciate that. Seifeldine, I'm not sure if that's how you say your name. Hopefully that's something close to hello, good morning. Zor, hi, how you doing? We're going to start. Yes, we started. David, hello, good morning. Chris is back again. So based on their last Q&A, I've decided to go with 3 droplets, 1 manager, and 2 workers for WordPress. Cool. You mentioned traffic. Does the automatic SSL, where is the actual cert sitting in the traffic container? So by default with traffic, it will store, that's a great question. So basically traffic is a front end reverse proxy. Let me just bring that up so everybody knows what that is about. It's a relatively new project. I don't know, it's at least a few years old, but it is sort of used heavily in the Go community because it's programmed in Go, as well as the container community because we like easy things in containers. And so this is a pure, from scratch, reverse proxy. It doesn't do everything that maybe HA proxy or Nginx would do. It's not a full web server. It's really just meant as a reverse proxy. But when you have any sort of container solution and you're doing multiple websites on the same port. If you need to run multiple websites on port 80, which pretty much that's the only port you're going to run in, and 443, those two ports, you can't launch more than one container on that port. So what you're going to need in that situation is a front-end load balancer that acts as a reverse proxy, and it doesn't necessarily always load balance. I guess that's the wrong term, right? We're talking about distributing things using HTTP protocol and using the headers to figure out which name goes to which container. So if you go to brettfisher.com, go to this container. And so it reads the HTTP headers. That's known as a layer 7 proxy. And if you know Swarm networking only speaks at a lower OSI layer. That's at layer 4, down there at the routing and IP layer. And it only understands IPs and ports. It doesn't understand the high-level HTTP protocol traffic. So that's what traffic is for. Now, of course, you can do this with Nginx, HA proxy, but stuff like that. But traffic is really cool. It's super easy to get working, and it works with Let's Encrypt automatically. So you can have it go and grab certificates for your domain and put SSL in place. And I give an example of that over at my dog versus cat repo. So I'm going to put these in. Ooh, I'm getting a coffee refresh. Thanks, honey. Because I need more coffee. So I'm going to put in a couple of links. Dog versus cat. This is my repo on it. So those are my examples. And what you'll notice, Chris, is in here under proxy. So this is my sample of using traffic. Obviously, this is a very simple solution, but I continue to try to build out the feature set, logging, monitoring, all the things, so that it feels more real world, because obviously that's the best examples ever, right, are the ones that actually came out of a production system and someone just cleaned it up and put it on the internet. Those are always, they're sometimes the hardest to understand, but they're always, I feel like, the best, because a lot of us are tired of, we need the 101 blog posts. I'm not knocking those. I do those, but it's hard sometimes when the example is really just works on my machine and would never be used in production. So I'm always trying to make these examples more real world. And you'll notice in here, I use a volume. And this is a good time to mention, I'm sure, another question that Alexandre asks here in a minute about persistent storage, which is you need, if you're on Swarm or you're just using Docker or Swarm, you're going to need something like RexRay. RexRay is kind of the best project for that. Think of RexRay as a storage orchestrator. And so it takes the storage you have, whether that's cloud storage or whatever, some fancy data storage system in your data center, and it gets it to the right container on the right node when it needs it. And that acts as a Docker plugin. And so you'll notice in this Nginx example on Swarm is I have some very simple, let me just zoom in there, very simple stuff. But one of the things I do is I take the traffic Acme directory and I map that to a named volume, and then down the named volume part, I store that in a DigitalOcean block storage. In this example, I'm using DigitalOcean. They have persistent storage known as DigitalOcean block storage. And that, I give it a gig-size drive, and that stores the config that it creates on the fly from all of these different options I give it. So it creates a dynamic on-the-fly configuration as well as, as well as the certificates. So to answer your question, when it goes to Let's Encrypt and gets your certificates, it stores them there. Now, it's not actually important if you're in a single node setup or in a single traffic setup. Like in this case, I don't have multiple replicas yet, because otherwise traffic would need a back-end storage solution like a database to keep all the nodes in sync. So I don't yet have that in this example. But if you're doing this example and one proxy front end is good enough for you for now, at least, especially for learning, it's sufficient, I think, to get that working so that you can learn the rest of the stuff and then come back to this later and make it highly available. But when you do this, you don't actually need to map that volume, because traffic is going to always dynamically go and get the certs when it spins up, if it needs them, because those certs have to be constantly renewed. I think it's once a month or something. So it's not something important where you need to back up those certificates. Those certificates can be regenerated at any time from Let's Encrypt. So you don't have to do that volume. Technically, it could just store them in the container, and then if it ever needed to recreate the container, like during an update, it would just go and get those certificates again. But I did that here with the volume, just to, one, show that you can do that. You can have persistent storage in traffic. And two, to hopefully eventually figure out a way for this to be multi replica and have multiple tasks all running the proxies on every node. That's my eventual goal, but I don't have that set up yet. Great question this morning, Chris. Alexandre, I hope you see the RexRay one here. That is the answer to your question on persistent storage for Swarm specifically and Docker. RexRay acts as a plugin. And if you're on Kubernetes, Kubernetes does some stuff out of the box, but it also has other stuff. RexRay actually works with Kubernetes, so they both basically function the same way. You either are using local storage on individual nodes, or if you need to make sure that the containers are flexible enough that they can move around, you need to have some back-end storage that you provided, and then the orchestrator makes sure that the data is stored there at runtime. The orchestrators don't automatically replicate data or move or copy data from one machine to another. That's a fairly complicated thing, and you're going to need something else like that. Ceph is a popular tool. We'll get into Flocker and Ceph and all that stuff probably later because we'll have more persistent questions, I'm sure, as we go along. Elendu, hello, good morning. What is the most common challenge when using Swarm in production? That's an interesting question. The most common challenge with Swarm, I think, is what we call day 2 operations. That is any production system, the most challenging thing. How do I keep this system running while changing it in flight and not having a downtime for my users or having extremely limited downtime for my users, but also changing things without breaking them? That's in any production system. In the 25 years I've been doing this, that's always the hardest part. It's basically like building a plane in the sky, right? Because you're running the systems, and if you break something, then there's not usually an easy way, at least before containers, to get back and revert back, right? Because we would always permanently change something. And so that's how the internet came up with something like blue-green deploys and auto-scaling groups and things like that, especially with AWS. They were one of the leaders with that first up, was to figure out how can we change things but also be able to get back to the old version if we broke something. So the nice thing is with Swarm is that rolling updates also have rolling rollbacks. And if you have taken my Swarm course, you know that in Swarm Mastery, I have a whole section now dedicated at the end just to updates and how to do updates in real-world scenarios. So I would say health checks and getting those updates right and testing the crap out of those. In fact, I had someone the other day, a student ask, hey, in this example, how exactly would the containers get updated? Would they get replaced, or is it just going to change the metadata of the service definition? And my answer to them is, well, I can speculate on what is going to happen, but to be honest, Swarm, it's one of those things where if you just think you're changing some labels or something and you're thinking, it's not going to touch my containers, you never know. There might be something in there where it causes an update and replaces the containers. And if you're not expecting that, that sucks. So I always recommend some sort of staging solution that you, the DevOps person, would be running these commands in on the exact same code that's running in production. Maybe it's just a couple of servers that aren't even being used by anyone. But you need a solution where you can test things before you do it in production. And you don't want to have to, obviously running on your machine is fine. That to me is more about just making sure the functionality works correctly. But you want a similar system to production in much smaller scale so it's not expensive, so that you can do everything you want to do in production before you do it there, just to be certain that everything goes as planned. That's what I think I love staging for. Staging, to me, as a DevOps person, I need a staging that's maybe even separate from the developers, or maybe use the one that developers are using, because I want to be able to test my operations stuff before I go production, as well as obviously test their code and whether their code's going to work correctly in production. So I would say those are the most complicated things. Obviously, testing monitoring your production system is always a challenge in any situation, because you're always wanting to add more and more monitoring, more insight and in-depth monitoring, but you also don't want to be exhausted by the amount of information your monitoring solution provides. So I would say number 2 on that list is monitoring fatigue. And that's the term I use for having just so much information coming out of your logging and monitoring solutions that you can't keep up with it, and you're too busy maintaining that to just, even do the rest of your job. So tuning monitoring solutions in any production system is an activity that's always ongoing forever and ever. It's not any harder in containers, it's just different. So learning how to monitor containers and the resources of the host and making sure that the database doesn't take up too much RAM so that your website still can run, all those things are sort of a monitoring configuration problem. But great questions. Niraj is back. Hello. Do you have any course in Docker Compose? I think you mean Compose. Docker Compose. So yes, Docker Mastery touches for a section on Docker Compose. Actually, several sections talk about Docker Compose because there's the file and the file format. On my new course, Docker for Node.js, that's coming out here in the next few months, that is going to be an entire course focused on someone who already knows Node and already knows Docker a little bit. They've taken my Docker Mastery course, and it's going to marry the two together to give you the best setup for Node.js. That's going to go heavily into Compose because Compose is the #1 tool I recommend for a developer for running locally. So we're going to spend a lot more time digging into Compose and advanced configuration settings. If you want to talk more about Compose, there's actually a blog post I just did for O'Reilly, and let me think, where can I get that? Let me pull that URL up 1 second. So those of you, I have not sent this out on my newsletter yet, but that's coming. I'm going to put up this blog post. Let me get here. Yeah. So over here on O'Reilly, I will put this in the chat. And so for those of you that haven't seen that around, that is actually a teaser of some things I'm working on for the Node.js course, which is more advanced Compose setups. And that basically documents 3 different areas: environment variables, templating, and then finally the command scope is what I call it. It's a set of tools that allow you to control scope of the Compose commands you're using. And so those 3 things together give you a whole lot of flexibility, especially in a team, for developing and using in Compose and using that YAML file. And it basically is all real-world stuff based on me working with larger projects and teams that need more advanced Compose setups. And that will be going, a lot of that will be going into my Node.js course. Not even necessarily specific to Node.js, really just a lot of it about how do I use Node.js day-to-day in Docker, and how do I get it into my testing infrastructure, and how do I get it into production. All right, so that, you'll see an announcement on that in the newsletter, as well as if you are a student on Udemy, you'll see an announcement when that goes live. So great question. Kurtamans, sharing volumes between multiple Docker instances. So yeah, sharing volumes between multiple Docker instances, that goes back to the RexRay. RexRay is, if you're on Docker or Docker Swarm, this is how you would do it, is using RexRay as an orchestrator to marry the backend remote persistent storage like AWS's EBS or EFS or DigitalOcean's DOBS, all these things that are off server, right? It's not really out of the box. There's not really any tools that suddenly move data around from one local hard drive to another one. That's actually tricky to do. But things like that do exist. There are replication solutions if you're not interested in RexRay. So let me first answer the RexRay question. The thing here we got to understand about storage is RexRay is not a tool that will suddenly make backend storage magically do different things. What I mean by that is if you have ever used AWS and you used EBS, Elastic Block Storage, that's the standard hard drive for machines when you're running them in EC2. And that kind of hard drive cannot talk to multiple nodes at once. It cannot be shared storage. Now, it can disconnect from one and connect to another one, and that's probably fine for a lot of your needs, is you don't usually need to share a single shared location on the network with multiple hosts, usually with like database servers, key value stores, even websites where you need to maybe store session state or caching or something like that. All those things almost always just need one instance of storage per container running. And so that works fine. It also works fine on DigitalOcean with DigitalOcean block storage. Azure has their own stuff as well. They all have this solution. This is sort of the default standard disk. But sometimes the confusion comes into play where people think that they can use something like RexRay that will suddenly allow that storage to connect to multiple nodes at once. And that is not a limitation of RexRay, that is a limitation of how storage works. So when you start looking at distributed systems, you need to understand that some storage provides a single connection to a single machine, and it can be read-write. Some storage provides a read on top of read-write, where it will allow you to have one node read-write, and it will connect to other nodes as read-only. And that I have not seen that in the cloud, but that is more common in data center technologies like IBM storage, NetApp storage, all these big storage vendors. They might have a solution like that. And that's really good for maybe when you need databases where you want to connect that database to maybe another solution that's sort of a read-only copy. Although I'll be honest, I think really the best way in most databases is to use the database replication technology there, because they all have a mirroring and replicating technology built into them. So that's always, I think, the best way to go. Lastly, with storage is an option where you can have multiple nodes all have read-write to the same location over the network. And that is common in Linux, that's known as NFS. That NFS network file system protocol works really well for Linux. And then on Windows, we all have probably experienced Windows shares, right? Windows networking shares, they use the SMB CIFS protocol. So those two technologies are usually what's used to allow multiple nodes to read-write to the same location. If you're on AWS, that is known as EFS. Elastic File System, I think is what it stands for, or something. I'm not really exactly sure. EFS. But EFS is basically NFS's protocol over the network at AWS. It's not as fast, and that's always one of the negatives of using it. But if you need a bunch of nodes to talk to that one place, and RexRay supports this. So RexRay, if you tell it EFS, it will do that. Docker's own built-in solution for Docker Enterprise, if you're a paying customer of Docker Enterprise, that has something called Cloud Store that does the same thing on Amazon and Azure. Now, if you're in DigitalOcean, DigitalOcean doesn't have that feature because that kind of thing is more advanced. A multi-read-write solution is a more advanced solution. So just realize that is all mostly related to storage tech, not really related to container tech. It's just a limitation of storage, and you need to account for that when you're building out your stuff. The other thing I will mention is there's paid products out there like Portworx. Portworx is a paid storage solution that will replicate data between nodes, and there's open source solutions like Ceph. Ceph. So Ceph is a replicating technology. I think it's owned by Red Hat now. And so there's other tools out there like that you can use to do replication technologies, but those are quite often a completely different need. Like you can't do that for databases. You usually are doing this when you have static files, for example. If I had a static website like WordPress with a bunch of images on the back end and I just needed to replicate those images out amongst the nodes, that might be a better solution than shared storage for those images. It's really up to you. Storage design is its own thing. I actually used to do that for a while, way back in the day, and it's really cool stuff, but it's mostly not related to containers. It's mostly just about the storage in the low-lying system. Great questions. All right, next. Matt says, using Docker for local dev. If I set up a Golang container and bind mount my code, how should I expose Golang to my IDE on the host? So great question, Matt. So today, my experience is all IDEs need remote debug support. So in your Golang app, you're going to need to, and I'm not a Golang expert yet, although I am taking a course on it, you're going to need to make sure that debugger runs on a port, and then you just publish that port in Docker, and then from your editor, you connect to that port from the remote debugger. This is how you do every other debugging solution I've ever seen, whether it's PHP, .NET, Node.js, Java. All of them, their IDEs tend to support remote debugging now because containers is a place where you have to have remote debugging. And even with Chrome browsers and doing like Node.js with Chrome browser where it automatically does remote debugging, that all works with Docker as well. So just make sure that you open up that port in Docker, and so you'll basically would be opening up multiple ports, right? Your container would have the app port and then the debug port for that. Good question. All right, next up, Santiago. I'm teaching, you're teaching Dockers and containers course at a Columbian Public College. Oh, that's cool. I am following your Udemy course. It gave me nice tips and tricks for my course and my students. That's great. I love it to hear that people are so excited about container tech that they go and help other people. That's how these courses got started. Was I was helping people in private workshops. I was supporting developer teams, and people kept saying, "Hey, maybe you're good at this. Maybe you should do this on the internet." So yeah, excellent that you're teaching in public college. I personally never went to college, so I really am always envious of people that actually got a full-fledged college curriculum. I learned on the job in the Navy for 6 years, and so we call that OJT. I am following your, so who is this? Oh, Chris is back. In Swarm, can you or do you recommend just focusing on getting your basic stack up, then afterwards go in and stack deploy your monitors, health checks, and all extra container services? I'm actually we're gonna switch back to the webcam only. All right. In this one, I put everything in the stack file for that app, and then I deploy that app. So health checks would be in there. Everything that needs to be in that specifically configured in that service, I do once. I don't do updates later to change things. I mean, if you need to change things, you do updates, but I don't do some sort of phased approach like that. Now, there obviously is an order to building out your stack, and if you watch my DockerCon video, if you're looking at dogs versus cat, which is the URL I put in earlier, if you look at dogs versus cat repo, that video from DockerCon shows me doing things in order. First, I install the Docker plugin for Rexray, so my storage is available. Then I deploy my proxy so that traffic is there available so that any apps I launch have the proxy working in front of them. That also means that I need the proxy network created first. So obviously I have to create that first. And then once I have sort of that infrastructure stuff, the core base stuff, I can start deploying my stacks. Now in a true production system, you would probably set up your monitoring and logging solutions as well before you start deploying your apps. But once it gets to apps, I'm fully fleshing out that entire compose file, and I'm deploying that stack at once. If I do something wrong, obviously I need to update it or change it later. I'm obviously doing rolling updates there for those services, but I don't necessarily edit them and throw in health checks after the fact. I always put that in first. Remember, my rule is always health checks from day one. Like even if you don't have monitoring solution built yet, always put in health checks, because those health checks are what make it possible for you to do near zero downtime updates through rolling updates. Otherwise, you're going to have at least seconds of downtime whenever you're changing out your apps on any orchestrator solution. You've got to have those health checks. So, Nicola, you said Kubernetes or Docker Swarm. So I think that I should be paying someone every time we do this to ask that question, because it is such a hot topic. Everybody wants to know Docker or Swarm or Kubernetes. Really, the answer is like Swarm, Kubernetes, Mesos, Nomad, and then now at this point, if you're in a cloud, are you using the cloud's version of Kubernetes? Are you using your own version of Kubernetes? Are you using Rancher or Docker Enterprise? I always advise new people in container land, new to stuff, to learn Swarm first. You can learn Swarm in a day. Take my Docker Swarm Mastery course. You can take that thing in a day and just sit down. And if this is the only thing you did at work, you would spend the whole day on it. But you can learn that in a couple of days. Pretty quickly, and then you'll get the gist of what an orchestrator does. The challenge with Kubernetes is because it's got so much more to it, and there's so much more ecosystem around it, that it takes longer to learn, and there's more complexity in setup and design. It's not near as easy for deployment and setup. So Kubernetes requires a lot more effort to not just build but also maintain. It's a much faster moving project right now, so those are not necessarily negatives if you need the requirements of Kubernetes. The problem is that in order to determine per your requirements, specifically for your applications and your goals and the size of your team and your budget, I would have to sit down with you for at least a half a day to figure all that out. I can't tell you which one is the right one for you, but this is my general guideline. Start with Swarm, learn Swarm. try to use Swarm. If you can use Swarm and it solves 80% of the problems for everyone, in fact, at this point, I feel like it solves 90% of the problems. It just doesn't solve them in a way that's immediately obvious out of the box, right? So sometimes you need to take courses and things to learn it, just like you would with Kubernetes. So you do that, and now what's possible is Swarm. If you can get away with that, Swarm is great. It works well. It works in production for all my customers and my clients, and a lot of my students use it. I hear from people all the time that Swarm is the perfect solution for them. They don't need to go Kubernetes. I look at Swarm and Kubernetes. It's like kind of like buying a car versus building a car. It can be that level of complexity difference. So if you can get away with using Swarm, it will save you time. It will be a simpler solution overall. But if you are a Kubernetes shop, if you already got people using Kubernetes, if you are determined to use a cloud's clustering solution for containers, all of those they're all going Kubernetes at this point. Honestly, I feel like a lot of that's because Swarm is so easy to use that they don't need to provide a solution out of the box at Amazon or AWS. But so Swarm is pretty specific to the Docker company and their ecosystem. So if you're using Docker Enterprise, if you're going to buy a tool, which I always recommend for companies that are going production containers, is buy some tools, like spend some real money, because if this is going to be your infrastructure, you don't want to just open source everything, because now you're going to need more engineers. Open source tools typically take more work to maintain and manage than commercial tools. So if you're going Kubernetes, I always first recommend that you buy a tool. You either buy Docker Enterprise, which can do Swarm and Kubernetes, or maybe you buy Rancher, which Rancher itself is free, but you would buy support for it so that you can call them. And then always use those support programs. Use the crap out of them. Like, call them as much as you can to help solve your problems. That's why you're paying for that support. If you're going to go Azure or Amazon, maybe you choose to use their Kubernetes solutions. That way you can use those support contracts and call them when things aren't working. And basically the only reason I'm suggesting all these is that will make your projects go faster. The last thing you want to do is to say, we're going to go production containers, and then to spend a month figuring out Kubernetes and how your enterprise infrastructure is going to look, right? So if you can shave some weeks off of that by using a pre-built version of it, great. I think using the open source tools and learning there is great for learning, but those are not necessarily the ways that I would recommend doing production for Kubernetes, just due to the levels of complexity, especially around things like permissions, RBAC, stuff like that. It's complex enough out of the box that you probably want a tool on top of that. Both are great orchestrators and will serve you a long time. If you're curious more about Swarm, by the way, on my website, I have several big Swarm articles. One is The Future of Swarm, and it talks about what they're planning to do next based on some interviews I did this July, just a couple months ago. So, all right, hope that helps. For a beginner, as she asked, for beginner, Kubernetes or Docker Swarm, always Swarm first, because I feel like you can learn Swarm very quickly, and I think that everyone needs to learn both, which is why I'm working on a Kubernetes course. We all should have at least the knowledge of two tools. Like, if you're a developer, right, you should probably have at least two languages in your developer toolkit. If you're a server operator, you should probably know a little bit about, maybe Ansible and Puppet, or Ansible and Chef, or Ansible and Terraform, or something, maybe Terraform and CloudFormation. Basically, having at least two tools to compare, because I think a lot of times when we have one, and I'm guilty of this too, is when we have only the knowledge of one tool, it's that hammer analogy where when the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you only have one tool in your tool bag to solve a problem, it seems like that's the only thing you know to solve the problem. So you will use that tool every time. So I think eventually we all are going to understand at least multiple orchestrators. For those of you that have entire data centers, you might look at Mesos. That's a much larger tool. It's used heavily in telecom and in traditional big data centers. Anyway, so I would suggest, try Swarm first, learn that, and then if you need to move to Kubernetes, then do that. And now at least you know Swarm is easy for small little projects, personal projects. I have teams that they use both. They use Kubernetes and Swarm. They use Kubernetes for large production systems, and then they use Swarm for easy deployment, simple solutions where they maybe don't have all of the third-party requirements and API requirements like Kubernetes would provide them. So hopefully that helps. Marvin, looking up to you. Thanks, Marvin. Hello, Patrick, Hans. Hello, everyone. Sujay, search GitHub for state open, label Hacktoberfest to get issues marked specifically for Hacktoberfest. Yes, thanks for that reminder. So in my article today, actually, over here is my article. Oh, no. On my Hacktoberfest post, if you scroll down, you actually see down here that a friend of mine, Jenny, actually, who works at Docker, figured out that you could link to all of the GitHub open issues that are labeled Hacktoberfest and then search a keyword. So you can search Docker or Kubernetes. It looks like Docker is up to 439 issues. Kubernetes has 74. And people are labeling issues Hacktoberfest because maybe those are good issues to work on. If you looked at mine actually, some of mine is the one on the top here, actually. I don't know how it got on the top, but that issue there. So yeah, if you're looking for things to do for Hacktoberfest, definitely do that. Thanks a lot for that reminder. All right, Matt says, Kubernetes course, yes, great. I'm glad you're excited. I'm very excited, and I'm actually going to be announcing here this month some of the stuff that we're going to be doing in that course. RRA says, nowadays, hearing a lot of Kubernetes, is that orchestration kind of tool? What is the difference between Docker and Kubernetes? So interesting, I get that question a lot. What is the difference between Docker and Kubernetes? Docker is a container engine. Kubernetes is an API, essentially, with a database backend that controls multiple servers running Docker. So Kubernetes runs on top of Docker. It runs the Docker engine underneath or some other container providing solution, but Docker is the default. And so it will take multiple servers and make them act like one. The simplest explanation for an orchestrator is that their job is to take multiple servers and make them act like one. So that when you're running commands like deploying an application, it treats a big set of servers, whether that's 5 servers or 50,000 servers, if you're Google. It makes them all act like one to your environment, where you don't have to care about which server this is running on or how it's going to get to the things it needs. All of that's provided in your application specification. So I've mentioned the other ones before, but Kubernetes really was the biggest one out of the gate, even though, honestly, we had Mesos and Mesosphere for many years before Kubernetes. It just wasn't, it was actually pre-container, Mesos was. It's a Apache Foundation project. And it was used in large data centers for managing workloads all around the data center. And it had its own format. And then Docker sort of created the standard format that we all now know as containers. And then everyone sort of circled around that. And then Mesos adopted that format. And then Kubernetes came along and really took over the orchestrator lead. I guess you would say it's a popular project very quickly, mostly due to Google's involvement, I think, with that project, the marketing and the engineering horsepower that they put into that to make it a good tool to solve a lot of cloud-specific problems. Nowadays, Kubernetes is a more general tool that solves a lot more problems than it did when it first started. But it's really just an API layer that runs as a bunch of containers on top of Docker to provide automation and scheduling and a lot of other tool stuff, automation around Docker. Hopefully that helps. Let's see. Mashiz, Makish. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Hi, I have a few Docker machines that I want to share access to with my other team members. What is the proper way to do that? So Docker machines you would not share. I guess what I'm thinking you're asking is that you're using the Docker machine command line to create machines locally. You don't share machines. Think of that as the old way. That's vagrant and old technology ways of doing things. Now with containers, if you need to share specific configuration around containers, you're going to probably do that in a Docker file and a Docker Compose file. If you need to share a specific application that you've built, you're going to share that in the image. And that image you're going to load up to Docker Hub or another registry. But you wouldn't necessarily share a Docker machine because there's nothing uniquely special about a Docker machine if you're talking about the Docker machine CLI. If that's not the question you're asking and you want something else specific, please just put that at the end of the, put that in chat, and I will get to that here in the end. Patrick says, we're using KubeSpray for setting up our K8s clusters. Thought it seems very unstable at time. Is it worth sticking with this for cluster setup? So with anything in Kubernetes right now, there are a plethora of projects to solve any one problem. If there is a challenge in the industry for Kubernetes right now, it's figuring out a path of maybe the most featured but also most stable tools that are the most supported in the community. And there's no better example of this, honestly, than server cluster deployment and then application deployment on Kubernetes. So you have kubeadmin that comes out of the box. You now have others like KOps, KubeSpray. They all have their own edge case problems and stuff like that. I'm not smart enough yet to be able to tell you that I've done them all enough to know which one of those is the right tool for you. But if you start, in fact, I think I might have a list here under, no, cluster setup. So I have at least 5. Kubicorn is a new one, and there's KOps, KubeSpawn. It's one of those things where you're honestly going to have to spend some time with each tool to figure out which one works in your team, because not every tool, you have unique needs. You might be on a specific cloud. You might have specific configurations. You might need a specific design. That's, totally going to be up to you. Some of these tools are designed for cloud. Some of these tools are requiring you to give machines up front, and then it will use those machines that you've already provisioned. So I honestly am just going to say, if you're having difficulties with KubeSpray, try another tool. Try Kubicorn, try KOps, try kubeadmin. If you haven't seen in the new Kubernetes 1.12, one of the new features is improved. Let's see, kubeadmin. Oop, not admin. Release notes, maybe? No, that's 111. Anyway, I believe it's kubeadmin that now has... No, it's not mentioning it here. Secure setup, multi-server setup. So that was one of the challenges before, was making sure you had a production-ready setup. And I believe if you look through the announcements on 1.12, they've improved that. I haven't actually tested it yet. I've been busy on this Node.js course, so I haven't been able to spend time on Kube 1.12 yet. So check that out. Check out some of the other tools. Honestly, just Google around and look at GitHub stars as an indicator of maybe how many people are using that tool. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a quality and ready for production tool. It just means community interest in the tool on GitHub stars. And hopefully that'll help you. Sorry you're having trouble with KubeSpray. So, all right, next question. Let's see. Elendu, thanks. Your courses were great. I appreciate your love of the courses. I'm glad you like them. More are coming. I'm excited to launch these next few courses that we have in the works. Morgan, you are the best. Thanks. Thanks a lot. You are the best. So Alfredo says OpenEBS. Yes, that's another persistent storage solution, OpenEBS. You can check that out. Storage OS 2 for Malaeus. Yes. I've not used Storage OS yet. I know of it, but I haven't actually been able to play with it. So tell me what you think. Put it in the comments if you use one of those other persistent storage solutions. Good, bad. Let us know what you think about those storage things. For Ashish, is there any course that teaches all storage replication, database replication, microservices, DNS scaling? Wow. I don't know of a course that does that. There are obviously lots of courses on the internet. A lot of what because I've been around a long time, I don't tend to take a lot of courses, video courses, on DevOps topics because I've had to live it. So I'm usually doing it before there's a good course on it. So I don't, unfortunately, have a lot of recommendations for other complementary courses. Database replication would be a part of a database course, and it would be specific to that database. Microservices, there's microservice courses out there. They would be specific for that course. DNS and cloud scaling, that's probably going to be an AWS course. That would be maybe where the best courses are, because AWS usually has the most courses available. So I would look for courses on AWS if that's where you're going to do your infrastructure. If you're on on Azure, look for Azure courses on how to do the infrastructure there. That'll give you information on DNS scaling. Storage replication is very specific to each cloud or each storage. No two storage systems do it the same. So you're going to need to find which storage solution you want, and then you're going to need to find education on that storage solution, because there is no storage standards in the industry. We have very few standards. In fact, right now, that's a big thing with the orchestrators and containers, is trying to standardize on like the CIO, the formats basically for standardizing on how containers interact with storage is a challenge, because traditionally the storage vendors don't want to standardize, because once they get you on their storage, they want you to stay there. So they don't want it to be compatible with everyone else's. Otherwise, you could just easily leave for another storage system. Anyway, that's a standard software vendor situation right there. Skip, what's up? Last week I've been setting up a software factory by creating a stack with GitLab CI, SonarQube, and Nexus 3. When doing this, I noticed it's not possible to update the services by redeploying the stack once a configuration file or a secret has changed. What's the best way to still update these configs and secrets with the latest downtime? Okay, so yes, you can totally change these. It's just not obvious out of the box. So a couple of ways you do it is, and you're going to need to experiment with this, is that you simply change the name in your stack file. So you go into the secret or the config for Swarm, and you just change the name of it. And so if I was in my dog versus cat, and I was here under, let's see, what secrets would I have? I have a ghost app. Where's that at? Ghost. Well, this is not the right one. I need the other one. This one uses a database. So if I had a password here and I was using secrets, so I would just change, if I needed to change a secret password, I would change however I was getting the secret into Swarm, and then I would change it here. So there's several different workflows to do it. Either you're manually going and changing the secret in Swarm and not using the Swarm file like I'm doing here, and then you just need to go in here and you can change the name in here of the secret that you've called it in Swarm, and then up here in your secret definition, you would do, this is sort of the simplistic version. If you go into the documentation for secrets under compose, let's search compose file. If we go into here and look at secrets, you will see that secrets. There are two syntaxes for secrets, long and short. And if you look at the long syntax, you will see that you can specify the source and the target. So the target means that I can make sure that my file name in the container is always the same. So it would be under /run/secret/name of my secret. So you can always have a different source name, but the same target name. And that's how you can do rolling updates. However, there's another way, and that's a new feature with secrets where you can find it here. Secrets now have a name. And so if you choose this name, and it says here, another variant for external secrets is when the name of the secret in Docker is different from the name that exists within the service. For the following example, this modifies the previous one with the external secret called Redis secret. So you can use this new name attribute to basically change the name each time without having to change the secret. So check that out. Try the workflow of that. You can also check out my Swarm Mastery course. I talk about secrets. I maybe don't talk about the change management of that, but that's a good new video. I do go through the secret stuff, but I don't necessarily talk about the changes of it. So sorry that I left that part out. I will definitely be looking to add that at some point. I'm going to put that in the list of good ideas for the improving of the course. That's maybe a topic for a demo that I can do here on YouTube. So that's a great idea for a demo. But honestly, you should be able to figure this out in about 10 minutes. You just change the names, try to redeploy the stack. It'll tell you if it works or not, right? It'll error out as you have probably seen when it doesn't work. It'll just say, can't use that secret name. But it's not intuitive, right? I wish they would make it easier. I've asked them to, I've had ideas for them on how they could take the stacks and make it just work every single time by automatically like adding a number or a date to the end of them each time they change. All right, moving on. Derek, hello, Derek. What's up? On the on the subject of health checks, what would you recommend as a health check for containers that run as a service that pulls RabbitMQ but doesn't have any REST endpoints of its own to use as a check? A service that pulls RabbitMQ but doesn't have any REST endpoints of its own. I don't know. Honestly, with distributed computing, if you are building apps, you basically need to give them endpoints of something. You need to figure out a way that you can have inspection from outside that application to make sure that it's valid. It doesn't necessarily need to be exposed to external resources, but there's, how do you know that application is currently able to talk to RabbitMQ? If you can't see what's going on in that container, then there's no way for you to check the health of it. So that would be specific to the programming language and whatever you're doing. If in more advanced scenarios, there may be a way to do this where you actually connect to the socket of an app. You can have the app create a socket instead of an HTTP URL. But quite honestly, it might be something where it's just the easiest thing to do is to make it spin up an HTTP URL and curl that. Health checks, I think, are an area that we're really all as an industry going to need to start understanding more. If you look at really high-end systems that can never fail, I'm sure if we all went and looked at nuclear controllers, nuclear power plant controllers, we would see that all their apps have multiple levels of ability for checking, right? Whether that's the app itself actually checking itself internally and then reporting its state to something else in a sort of a push model. But with containers and distributed computing, we have all adopted a pull model. So that has been the standard way to do things, where I am the monitoring tool, in this case the health check, and I'm going to pull some information from my app to make sure and validate that it's correct. In a really hacky solution, if you were limited and you just simply weren't allowed to add a web server into that app, maybe you could have that app write out some sort of file somewhere with its current state, and the health check is going and checking that file. This is a really sort of hacky solution, but hey, sometimes you just got to do it. So the application health check is going to go find that file, make sure that it's within the last 30 seconds or whatever has been written to disk, and then checks the state inside that file. That it can be something where you're providing some sort of push-pull model. I've not actually seen that in the wild, but to be honest, most of the people I'm working with are they're either all web services, so they're always building web services into their health checks, or they're a company that's really new to this distributed computing game, and they don't have good quality health checks yet for these apps. I mean, a lot of us pre-container, didn't update apps a lot. A lot of companies just were afraid that they had maintenance down windows where they would just take things down, and then the only way they knew that apps were working was, by their customers not complaining and the server's not going down. So I think there's a lot to learn here. I am probably not the right expert on advanced coding health checks. That's a great topic for probably a small course for somebody who's a smart developer, but I'm not sure that that's me. But thanks for the question, Derek, and good to talk to you. Biker says, I occasionally find with Docker EE that I can't delete something like a service. I had to go into each node and manually kill the containers associated with the service that could be deleted with the service from UCP. Thoughts on why this happened? Biker, that sounds like a bug, and that sounds like you should call Docker Enterprise Support, because that's why you're paying for it. I don't have any sort of known issues on the top of my head, and it certainly is not a normal thing. If Docker Enterprise is set up correctly, now they have these new tools called Docker Certified Infrastructure, DCI, and if you're using tools like that they sort of guarantee that the quality of the infrastructure that you have the right resources, that you have the right kernel versions. Assuming you're doing all that and you're still having issues with simply going in through the UCP and deleting things, that is definitely a bug that you should be working with their support team on, because it should always be able to delete containers and services. I'm not sure why it would have that problem. And Joe Bates says, hi. Hello, Joe. RabbitMQ has a REST API that could be used for health checks. So Daniel, yes, that's a great point. But you don't want to have one container's health check testing another container. That's not the point of a health check. A health check is to certify the container it's in. Technically, it's not a true enterprise monitoring tool. Health checks are really about validating that the container it's running are valid, not that that container can talk to something else. That is the job of a much larger tool like not DigitalOcean, Sysdig or Prometheus or Datadog is a good one. There's lots of them out there, and those tools are designed to check apps from the outside and make sure that apps can connect to each other and that they have access. So they can run agents on servers and ensure connectivity and all that. The reason you don't want to do this, Daniel, and it's a great question, I don't blame you for stating that, because it's something that I did, I think, at first, and then I realized there's a potential for cascading failure if you do that. If I put a health check in a container that requires it to have access to another container, and then that other container goes down, that container is going to start rolling through and trying to fix itself, right? The orchestrator is going to replace that container. But now your health check here is failing, and it's going to start changing this container too. And so if you did that all the way up the stack, where every container's health check was checking the things it needs to talk to, your entire app would have a cascading failure set where everything would eventually start rolling through update cycles because it's trying to fix the problems that some other container is already working on. So if you think about that, it's an issue that basically means container health checks are not smart enough to do multi-layer distributed computing monitoring. That's the job of a higher level tool that we have out there like Prometheus, other tools like Datadog. So great point. I'm glad you brought that up because I did that mistake at first and it didn't go well. It has problems whenever you're doing stuff, right? So let's see. Biker. Oh, you already read that. Joe says hi. Message, I'm going to say that name a different. Hopefully I pronounced it better this time. Thanks for reply. I'll try to explain it further. I've created a few VPSs with Docker on them using Docker Machine. Now I can access them only using the computer which they were created with. I want to share access to these machines to other team members. How can how can they run so they can run commands on these VPSs? All right, so what we're talking about here is Docker Machine configs. So Docker Machine does not provide an easy way to share its config. And if you didn't know, let's go to the command line. If you didn't know, your stuff for Docker Machine is all in Docker Machine. So inside your profile is a .docker directory, and that directory has a machine directory in it, and in there are the certificates, the private certificates to allow you to authenticate and remote SSH into those machines, as well as talk directly to the TLS endpoint of Docker, as well as a list of machines. So like if I looked at machines, I would see a list of the machines that I have in my own Docker machine, and those certificates are there, and then a cache. So those things need to be shared with the other people so that they can get access to those Docker machines. Now, if you're on a cloud technology, then you could always add certificates to those cloud VMs, and then people could just SSH into them normally. But if you wanted those other people to have Docker machine access, because it is a pretty easy tool for that, you would need to share these configs. And since there's no built-in way, there's probably at least a half a dozen tools out there that would allow you to share these configs in your team. And I would say just Google it, Docker Machine config sharing or something like that, or Docker Machine sharing, and you will find these tools on GitHub. And you're going to have to try a couple because they all have different design scopes. One of them may be designed for putting these files inside a Git repo, and then you share it through the Git repo. Or another one is for sharing these files out in shared storage, like on your network, and then other people access them that way. So you're going to need to figure out the workflow that works best with your team on sharing those. But look into those tools. That'll help you out. Great question. All right. Who's next? Ernesto. To facilitate my work, I do monitoring of the virtual machines with Zabbix. I guess how you say that? Zabbix? I do not find a way to directly monitor the microservices. Is there any method to do it to achieve this? I have never heard of that tool, so unfortunately, I don't have any advice for you on that tool. How to directly monitor the microservices. So you're going to basically need to be able to talk to the microservice. If it doesn't expose anything, then there's no way to health check it. You're going to have to learn processes and methods for getting your applications to talk to those microservices through some sort of external endpoint, whether it's HTTP or a Linux socket or something else that you're using to validate that that application is working well. That's kind of otherwise, the only thing you're going to be checking is the app running. You can do that through Docker and through other Docker monitoring tools. You can just say, is the container running? And that doesn't necessarily mean it's working right. It just means it's running. And that is dependent upon whether your monitoring tool can talk to Docker. There are lots of Docker monitoring tools. If you're into Prometheus, there is something called SwarmProm that from Stefan is a great set of getting started tools for Docker Swarm with Prometheus. It's a great out-of-the-box config. I use it in a lot of my examples. There's actually another one out there that I found recently. Let me see if I can find it. No, I can't find it. There was another one I found the other day on GitHub. Basically, I just searched Prometheus and Swarm, and I found another set. So in here, you have things like C-Advisor and Node Exporter. And C-Advisor and Node Exporter are things, projects. Sorry, I can't type and talk at the same time. So Google has something that basically will dig into Docker, pull out the data, and make it available through an HTTP endpoint, and that's C-Advisor. So that is typically used by Prometheus and other tools to get information out of Docker. Docker now actually has its own built-in endpoint for getting metrics out of Docker itself. That's known as the Docker Engine Metrics. So if you just search Docker Engine Metrics, you can learn about that, and away you go. So hopefully that helps you get started. Sorry, I don't know anything about that particular monitoring tool. There's a lot of them, and unfortunately I don't know them all. All right, a few more questions, and then we're going to wrap this up. So Victor says, hi from Uruguay. Hello. What are your thoughts on using Docker in IoT over a fleet of Raspberry Pis? Absolutely. Do that. IoT is a great example, especially as Docker works well on ARM devices and Raspberry Pis. So if you search out there, you're going to find a few key people that are really great on that. One of them, Alex Ellis. So that's the Alex Ellis blog, alexellis.io. That is a great one where he has stuff on Raspberry Pis. Another great one is, let's see, Raspberry Pi Docker. It's going to be one of the ones that comes up right up in Google. HyperRiot, they have a couple of Docker captains that work for them. Actually, I think at this point, one works for them. And they have a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, if you know Raspberry Pis and ARM, then you know these guys probably. And they're Docker specific. So this is a great resource for a lot of things about getting, in fact, really originally they were some of the biggest leaders on getting ARM to work well with Docker, and so I definitely recommend that. If you didn't know this, by the way, if you're on Mac or Windows, Docker has built in something called QEMU or QMEU. I think it's QEMU. It's an emulator that allows you to run Raspberry Pi containers on your Mac and on your Windows machine, even though they're not ARM. Like, it basically emulates the ARM processor and allows you to test things locally before you put it on IoT devices. So if you didn't know that, just try running a Raspberry Pi container. You can find that on those blogs. They will talk to you about how to do that, actually. and that will get working. So yeah, great idea, IoT. Let's do it. I found tool machine share to import export machines, but I'm not convinced it's safe for use in production. Well, you're not going to be using that tool in production. You're using it across a team, right? But you're not going to be putting it on the servers. I wouldn't be putting Docker Machine on my servers. The whole purpose of Docker Machine is so that I can sit locally on my machine and administrate servers remotely. Now, what is Docker Machine doing in the background? All it's doing is creating and managing TLS and SSH certificates. In fact, if you use the generic driver with it, you're not even using SSH. You're creating your own SSH certificates for the generic driver. So I would not worry about using in production, because that tool should not be on servers in production. It should be on your local machine. That's the goal of Docker Machine. If you're going to put it on a server, then you don't really need Docker Machine at that point, because you're probably provisioning machines and managing them other ways if you're doing it from a server automation tool like Ansible or SaltStack or Puppet. So I would not need to personally validate that tool needs to work on a server, because it's only going to run on my machine. Again, the whole goal of Docker Machine is really just to create a VM and then let me access it remotely through SSH and TLS. And this other tool that you're using is only sharing the config files from Docker Machine. It's not controlling Docker Machine, or at least it shouldn't be. It's really just managing those files on your hard drive. So I wouldn't worry about it. If it works for you, I would do it. Louise, I'm doing the course at Udemy. Great. Expect I can create an environment for Magneto 2 development at the end. The course looks very good. Is it too difficult to create an Nginx plus MySQL PHP environment? So Nginx, MySQL, PHP, all very standard tools. I have a repo on PHP. It's one of the ones for Hacktoberfest that you can check out. Hacktoberfest, I have a work in progress here. So for Hacktoberfest, if any of you are PHP or Laravel or any other PHP type developers, I would love some contributions and some cleanup on this repo. And I have put issues in here on some things that need to happen. I'm going to add actually some more today. I'm going to remind myself now that needs to happen today, so that you all can have some stuff to work on and basically get your free t-shirt, make contributions to open source, and also help your project. So this example came out of several projects I've done. Multiple clients of mine are big PHP shops. So I have, especially Printer Logic, which is one that helped contribute to this project originally. And you're going to need a more advanced setup, because PHP has a lot of things to it, right? I mean, PHP has Composer, and people are usually using Gulp and Node for doing npm commands, and then you've got Nginx involved. So it's already advanced just to do PHP in general, right? It's not near as simple as something like Go or maybe Node.js. So in that case, yes, you're going to need compose files. I don't give you all of those examples for Magneto because I'm not a Magneto person. But hey, show me what you got. If you're in my course, get into Docker Mastery Chat. Show people what you're working on in the general, and we will help. People, there's a lot of PHP people in there, and so they're going to give you feedback. I always, if you can open source any of it and sort of put it on GitHub. If you've ever used GitHub Gist before, you can just go to gist.github.com, post some of your code, and then put it in the channel and say, hey, everybody, this is not working for me, or this is working. What do you think? Any ideas for improvement? Stuff like that, and we can help. There's lots of people in there in the Slack chat. And good luck with your project. Carlos, I have a Gluster FS system but can't mount it inside a container on Docker Swarm. Have you run this problem before? So with Gluster, you're going to be running it on either in containers or on the host themselves, and you're not going to mount it from inside the container. You're going to use it as the volume for the container. So you're going to need to find another tool that will automate Swarm mounting the container's volume into wherever the Gluster storage is you have. So I don't have a tool off the top of my head for that. You're probably going to have to do something like Swarm Gluster and see for Rexbray getting you, I don't know. I don't know if Gluster, here's one. Using Gluster as a backend for Docker volumes, also as a plugin. So yeah, so start checking this stuff out. Obviously there's going to be varying levels of quality, but you're going to need something. So you don't want to be in the container and try to manually somehow get to Gluster. You want to use the volumes feature set of Docker to map the Gluster in. And I don't have specifics for you on how to do that. So if you're, of course, if you're in Slack chat, you can always ask other students. There's 11,000 people in there. Maybe someone's used Gluster before, and they can help you with that. So sorry, I don't have more specifics, but good luck, Carlos. It should be possible. It's just a question of getting all that set up. Shashank, what are your other favorites in DevOps toolchain? Any recommended courses or reading material for someone getting started in DevOps? So, great question on DevOps. If you have not heard of this, this is a thing that I haven't mentioned on this podcast today, or this isn't a podcast. What is this? This is an AMA on YouTube. Is my own offline AMA. So at AMA issues, I have stuff in here on DevOps. So if you search for DevOps in here, basically this is a place where people ask me questions and I answer them on GitHub, similar to how we're doing this today, but this is in an offline. So if you're going to get started in DevOps, here's a whole post on my opinions on strategies you need to take, on courses. Well, actually, there are no courses listed in here yet. I don't think so. I don't think there's any video courses, but I'm going to mention one here at the end. And then I mentioned tools. As you can see, this is a long diatribe on things you can try. So I will put this in the chat. And that is basically my opinion on how to learn the DevOps way of things. To me, DevOps is not really a job. It's more of a set of activities or role that we play in an organization. We don't, it's, you know, I call myself a DevOps person, but what does that really mean? It just means that I'm an operator that likes to work with developers and we make stuff go faster, basically. We deploy faster, we improve quality, and we talk to our customers. That's really the essence of DevOps. So check that out. But there's a course out there that I did not make, DevOps on LinkedIn. No. DevOps Linda. DevOps Foundations. It's on Lynda or LinkedIn Learning. Let me see if I can find it on LinkedIn Learning. This is a great team of guys out of, yeah, this one right here. So let me put this in chat. Oops. So if you're brand new to DevOps, go check out this course. I took some of it. I haven't actually been able to finish it, but there's this whole set of DevOps Foundations courses on there that is it going to take me to that? I guess it's not going to take me to that. It's a set of different DevOps, and it's by a couple of guys out of Austin, Texas, that do DevOps for a living. They actually run a DevOps conference down there called DevOps Days, and I've found their stuff to be really great at the start because they don't focus on the tooling right away. They focus on the thought and the mindset and the methodology of why DevOps exists, and that's important when you're getting started because otherwise you think it's just using Jenkins and Ansible, and it's not. Those are tools that you can use to get the job done of a DevOps workflow, but they are not DevOps tools. There is no such thing as a DevOps tool because every one of those tools out there can either be used, they can be used in lots of ways, and really, to me, DevOps is a mindset and a methodology to getting your work done with other people in a team. It's not a tool, and that's sort of my approach to it, but hopefully that will help you out. Good luck with that. I don't know why it's not, it says there's an error in putting that link. So I don't know why LinkedIn isn't working there, but just search DevOps Foundations LinkedIn. For some reason, my link isn't working. That's weird. All right, a few more questions and then we're done. We're running a little late today, and you have lots of great questions. So the last few are going to be Ernesto, previously there were problems in the Docker Hub with some official containers with vulnerabilities. How can I be sure that an official container is healthy? Ernesto, you're asking about an impossible situation. There's no such thing as well, at least I've almost never seen it. It is extremely rare. Let me change that statement. It is extremely rare for any open source repo to be vulnerability free. In case you all didn't know, Hub has all these official images. There's like 170 official images. This is not, these security vulnerabilities are not related to containers. This is about the app itself. So if I just do MySQL and I go into the official MySQL image and I go under tags, I can see that there are vulnerabilities in every one of these. And that is not the fault of Docker. That has nothing to do with Docker. That has to do with the fact that these apps have requirements in them that have known vulnerabilities. And that is the truth of all open source software or even closed source software. And they're all going to have CVEs. The question to you is really, what are you willing to take? There's 3 levels of risk when it comes to CVEs and the open database on vulnerabilities. And if you're someone who you cannot ship critical vulnerabilities, well then you can't run MySQL right now. You can't run the latest version because this vulnerability is the glib. Glib is a required, like almost everything that's in Linux requires glibc. And glibc has a known vulnerability in this particular release, and you can go click on it and see that. And this is in the open source CVE database. You can look at the exploits. All of these obviously are varying. And in case you didn't know, the cool thing about Docker Hub is it actually exposes these things so that we can see them. It shows us in this great report. Before, if you just downloaded MySQL and used apt-get, you would never have known that there was all these risks unless you went and did your own analysis, right? But at least now with Docker Hub, it's great that they now put this in the open source repos. So this is not container stuff. This is all application requirements that have to be in the container in order for that app to work. And they just happen to be vulnerable. They have known issues. And that is the nature of software today. Every app I run has vulnerabilities. It's just a question of which ones are you willing to accept, and are you in an organization that has oversight on this? And I honestly find that very few, maybe banking organizations and stuff like that, but very few organizations can get away with running without any vulnerabilities. So if you even go through this list, just, MySQL, the old versions don't, only the new latest versions show you the scanning. But it would be really hard pressed to find a version that doesn't have a vulnerability. So what you might be able to do is go into one of these and wait for the update. As soon as one of those upstream things gets fixed and they fix the vulnerability in that stuff, Docker team tends to rebuild these images very quickly. So, within days, I think it's within days of the fix being out in the wild and actually being in the package repos with apt and yum and all that stuff, they get put in there. So in case you didn't know all that, that's some background on how that security works. Everyone's saying thank you. You're welcome. Thanks. And then who's going to be the last one there? Well, I don't see the vulnerability listing. The last question here is, I don't see any vulnerability listed in Docker Hub, even for the same image. Is it required to be logged in to see this? Yes, you have to be logged in to see the vulnerability database. I don't know why. They just require you to be logged in. Ernesto, what is the future of Docker Swarm? All my infrastructure is based on Mesosphere, and I'm thinking about changing for this new project. Docker can promise a good future for Swarm. So Ernesto, I don't believe any promises 100%. All software could go away. Tomorrow, Microsoft could decide that Windows is no longer a thing. So obviously, no one's going to promise. But if you go to brettfisher.com, you will see at the very top, the second post is on the future of Docker Swarm. So read this post. I will see if this works in. So that link worked. The future of Docker Swarm is me doing a full dissertation on bug fixes over the last year, new features that are coming from the Docker team. I have an interview with the Docker Swarm team with Anshul, and we hung out at Docker headquarters a couple of months ago and just talked about what they're working on. They're hiring more engineers, and basically they're going to try to make Swarm better. So yes, I think it does have a future. Every indication is that there's going to be a future of Swarm, a good future for Swarm. And so I still recommend it as the first orchestrator to try and see if you can use it, because it's just so wonderful and easy to use, and it works out of the box. So it's nice. and secure and safe and is redundant. It's very easy to make it fault tolerant and to set up a production system with it. All right. Thanks, Ernesto. Thanks, everyone. If I didn't answer your questions, sorry about that. Feel free to, I will stay on the live chat for a few more minutes, and I will answer questions in the live chat. Of course, if you're in my courses, dockermastery.com, swarmmastery.com, everything is available at brettfisher.com/docker, brettfisher.com/docker. You can get all of my course coupons there, the best coupons for my courses, only $10. And I'm more on the way, and I will see you here next week. We will be doing the same thing. I probably will do this next Thursday as well. So if I'm not able to do this at real time, come back to this channel next week, and I hopefully will have all these videos published in a new playlist that basically goes through each one of these each week, and hopefully we'll have some stuff in there that you can check out. So thanks again, Internet, and we'll see you next week.